you've said in your book, and that is that the devil is lodging in the Vatican. With all of the allegations we've seen recently of sexual abuse involving priests, do you believe that is the devil's work?
Beh sì, intendiamoci, il demonio tenta tutti.
Well, yes, the devil tempts everyone.
There's something terribly wrong with the Vatican, and everybody can see it. It's like Sodom and Gomorrah. They're molesting people's children, and they're worshiping the devil. It's the worst types of abominations imaginable. And they pretend to be Christians. Obviously, these are an enemy hiding in plain sight. Seems like wherever you go these days, there's evil waiting for you. It's not just at the Catholic Church. It's just about every church out there. You see some of these other churches, they're not even hiding the LGBT. They're not even hiding what they're really into. But they call it a church. Seems like that's the new thing these days. But then again, there's nothing really new under the sun. We're just discovering or rediscovering what's been happening for quite some time, thousands of years, and the process is highly refined. Corruption, getting into people's minds. And essentially that is what all of these franchises are doing. The Vatican is no different than any other franchise promoting evil, except that this has the hint of legitimacy. And it's a very real threat to Christianity because there's over 1 billion people that subscribe to Catholicism. It's the largest denomination out there. And of course, there's a long history when it comes to the Catholic Church and Christianity. Essentially, it seems like they've taken over. It's like the empire. It's like the Roman Empire of Christianity. And essentially, that's exactly what it is. And we've talked about this in a previous broadcast, how the Roman Empire essentially hijacked the church. But it wasn't just an empire. The Romans were worshiping the fallen angels and were essentially the antithesis of Judaism and Christianity in the old world. And they would persecute and torture and murder people of faith for sport and coliseums and the like. And so, essentially, Christianity has become mainstream sun worship, Apollo worship in disguise. And it's devolved into something much more sinister and Luciferian, and you see the symbolism everywhere. And the transgressions are abound. It's not just Sodom and Gomorrah. It's not just raping children. But essentially they attempt to violate every law and every statute in the Old Testament, one way or another. They worship Jesus, they worship Mary, they worship the saints, they worship everyone they can, but that's not what the Bible teaches us. They have idols everywhere, statues everywhere, including a secret room in the basement where they worship the morning star. In the book of Isaiah, the morning star is a reference to Lucifer. And they try to twist it and turn it into Jesus is the morning star. Jesus is Lucifer. And they worship Lucifer as Jesus. It's so backwards, upside down, and messed up. And it's meant to be that way. It's meant to confuse people, because that way the victim is even more in transgression. The error is even greater than before. It's perhaps better to be a non-believer than to start worshiping the devil in perverted ways. And so this makes people transgress with or without their knowledge in ways that are very dark in nature. We've been talking about how they lead people astray, how many people have been led astray. Most Christians out there are in fact worshiping Jesus instead of the Almighty, despite what the Gospels tell us, despite what Jesus tells us. And trying to convince people of the obvious truth after they've been fooled is at times more difficult than you might think. So you have to wonder, are they really that stubborn? Or is there something else going on? If the Bible tells you so, then it means what it says, and it says what it means. We could go through all the Bible passages again, but essentially it's as simple as the Lord's Prayer. It's not our Jesus that we pray to. And again, they even try to make it more confusing, but Jesus never worshipped himself. Jesus never told people to worship Jesus. It's so anti-Christian to say otherwise. And yet, we have a narrative from just about every Christian church out there that confuses people. Jesus wasn't confusing. Jesus didn't confuse his disciples. And the Bible doesn't confuse you either. Now, that may or may not register to some people out there, to be quite honest, because in the modern world, everything is very confusing. Wherever you go, you're confronted with evil. And it starts in school. It starts pretty much right there in kindergarten. Obviously, first they teach you the ABCs, but it's not long before they're teaching you devolution, and now it's even worse. Much worse. With the transsexual agenda and the like. But they force feed people. They force fed everyone devolution, trying to make people believe that the world just spontaneously generated, that the universe came from nothing, came from a big bang, and then people evolved chemically from primordial soup into the simplest form of life, and then became eventually monkeys, and those monkeys eventually became humans. There's just so many problems with their arguments. We've been talking about this for years. But obviously, you can't get something from nothing. That's a violation of the law of thermodynamics. Life doesn't just chemically evolve from nothing into something. Nobody's ever seen that happen. And of course, even if it could happen, it doesn't explain the chicken and the egg problem with DNA and proteins. You can't get proteins without DNA. DNA is a programming language, like a computer program. The simplest form of life contains megabytes of information, talking an encyclopedia's worth of information just for blue-green algae, which is pond scum, which is considered the simplest form of life. From primordial soup to pond scum is a leap in technology. Requires an extensive program. Most people don't appreciate that because it's so microscopic, it's so small. Can't really appreciate the finite qualities of pond scum, how it breathes and grows and maintains itself. But we're not talking about evolution. We're talking about assembly. We're talking about design. And it's right there in the DNA. Most people couldn't care less about science. They don't know anything about biology. But for those that do, then they can appreciate what we're talking about here. But we're not taught the truth in school. We're taught devolution. We're taught some dumbed down version of what's going on. We're taught lies for a reason, because they want people to lose their way. If you believe in devolution, then you have a major problem when you pick up a Bible. And that's the point. And there are many other strategies or tactics that are used by the dark side that essentially lead to a similar effect, like the Santa Claus. They try to replace Christmas with something secular and commercial, and then they pull the rug from underneath you when you're about 6 years old. There is no Santa Claus. Ha ha ha. And they train you to not believe, to be a disbeliever. And that is corruption. That is liberalism. That is evil. There are many different forms of corruption, and in the modern day, with movies like The Matrix, you get new variations, like we don't live in the real world. We live in a simulation. You hear about that in the news, even. And of course, people just wrap their minds around that. Yes, we live in the Matrix. Yes, we live in a simulation. Nothing can be real. And you even hear people say, and this is pretty shocking, but you even hear people say that AI wrote the Bible. Think about that, if you dare. And people get into that. They're like, oh yeah. And in fact, it's not just people. You have the deep state, you have cult members, super AI, and all of the technology out there that we've been talking about, including synthetic telepathy, believe that or not. Implanting these ideas in people's minds so that it attacks their faith. And again, this is from the same industry that is in fact making vaccines that target people's spiritual brain, if you will. The fun vax. But essentially they plant these ideas, and people can't overcome these obstacles, these objections. And that's what they are. They're objections in your minds. They act like doubt. They hold you back. And if you're always doubting, then you can never move forward. You can never get beyond that stage of early development. And of course, this is an unnatural state for humans. We're not meant to be confronted with such complex lies, but we are. And so you get this paradigm, if you will. People think that we're living in a matrix, that the Bible was written by AI as a form of control. But again, you have this chicken and the egg problem. If we're living in a simulation, in a computer, if the computer wrote the Bible to give us something to think about, then where did the computer come from? Oh, mind blown. But nobody ever talks about that. Where does the computer come from? What came first, the human or the computer? Now, of course, you could find the intellectual atheists that will probably tell you that the assimilation happened a long time ago. And that is another argument altogether. It seems like this would be the very first time, based on how hard they're trying to assimilate everyone, but obviously, if humanity was allowed to be captured and assimilated and plugged into a matrix, how long would they stay there? And that's one of the subjects that we've been talking about. But for those of you that have been conflicted with propaganda like, do we live in a matrix? Did the AI write the Bible? Where did the computer come from? If we were already in the matrix, they wouldn't be trying to assimilate us. And we would just be living our lives, our world, evolving into Star Trek or Star Wars. In any case, what came first? The human or the computer? Obviously the human came first. Where did the human come from is the question. And that, of course, is in the Bible. How did we get here? Why are we here? These are the questions that we should be thinking about just about every day. We should be thinking about the meaning of life and what the implications are. If we didn't just get here, if we're in this world of good versus evil where we're forced to choose which way we go, what happens next? What happens if we choose the dark side? What happens if we don't pay attention and do things right? You kind of have to look at this as if you're working a job for a corporation? What happens if you only do 30% of what's expected of you, or 50% of what's expected of you? You're going to have a performance review. You're going to get written up. You're going to get fired, essentially, if you don't get your act together. You know, there'll be some coaching, and there'll be some training, and there'll be some lessons and the like. But eventually, if you don't get your act together, then you're going to be out the door. And that's essentially what this training program is. That's the meaning of life, to a certain extent. To get it right. Kind of like the movie Groundhog's Day. You wake up every day, and it's more or less the same thing. And the expectation is that you'll get it right before time runs out. And so it's a difficult journey. You know, some people make it, most people don't. As the Gospels tell us, wide is the gate and broad is the way that leadeth to destruction. Most people don't make it. There's a million reasons not to make it, essentially. And so the churches that are out there, especially the mega churches for the most part, are just another obstacle in your way. There's nothing that replaces reading the Bible and knowing it by heart the best you can. Better than your favorite song, better than your favorite movie. And faith comes from the spoken word. And so listening to the Bible on tape every day is the best way to stay in touch with reality. Because of the rest of the people out there, they're not in touch with reality. They're living in an illusion, in a lie, in a matrix, if you will. But a physical one. And so the objective here is to pass the test, is to get it right. To be outstanding people. To redeem yourselves for original sin and all other sin that has transpired since the beginning of humanity. So we have a lot to make up for personally and in the bigger scheme of things. But we'll be talking about that in future broadcasts. We've certainly talked about some of that in some of our previous broadcasts, especially the original sin. And this comes back to the snake in the garden and worshiping oneself instead of the Almighty. We'll get back into all that in a future broadcast. Appreciate everybody tuning in. Feel free to mirror this content. This is Stranger Than Fiction News. And if you're listening to this, you are the Resistance.